in our community, all the surrounding community of Springfield, greater Springfield, we're seeing what everybody else in this country is seeing to a certain degree, as far as our weather in general is just gone berserk over the last 4 to 5 years, especially. So it's really impacting our communities in many ways. We're seeing heat like now that we haven't seen before. And we're also seeing, heavy rains, and things are just different. You can just tell the climate is shifting in different ways over the last 10 years, especially. So there is an impact, and especially around our area.
I also wanted to say that it also affected us as a community, that we were forced to come together and see how it really was climate change affecting us. We were taken by surprise and needed to come together and have our voices heard and pay attention.
Climate justice means communities like Springfield don't pay the health and safety impacts for decisions that were made by special interests. Not everyone makes decisions that lead to climate change, but we're all paying the price, and that's not justice.
But I think for the future, I think we need to focus more on getting away from fossil fuel and being more fuel efficient or solar efficient, lack of a better word.
I want to see some initiatives around the air quality in our community. That's something that I've been affected by, and I know a ton of people who have like asthma and different breathing issues. And that's something that I think, especially with the pandemic going on, we need to focus on improving.
Climate justice to me means that we as a community are considered, and that as a community that has many people of color, that how climate change and all of the negative aspects of it and how it affects us more than others is considered considerably.
I think climate change, like how it's impacted my community, is that I've now been charged to do this work because it's become more than just a abstract concept in today's society. There's organizations that care about this. There's foundations that are putting money behind this, and there's a reality that our climate is changing, and the ways in which we have the opportunity to have an impact is by doing stuff that is going to be sustainable, not just for folks that have high income, but for communities of color and low income folks. This is a strategy that is going to help everybody, and it's a twofold community effort impact. The people that need it the most are going to be impacted, and it's necessary. It's more than necessary. It's beyond necessary at this point. So I've been drawn into the climate work because the urgency is there, and where I would say climate wasn't my language, wasn't my forte a year ago, 2 years ago, can pull my community partners in on this. Now it's part of the conversation. And I also say that our community is has not stopped dealing with the issues of systemic racism and oppression. We've just added climate to the conversation. It's an and conversation. I have to still deal with systemic racism, oppression, inequality in health access, and climate change. So though that layered pressure on our community is something that has built my awareness and made me say, even though I didn't start out doing this, I can't stop now.
So I want to invite our two distinguished guests to come up, and I'm going to say a few things about them. So Reverend Mariama White-Hammond is joining us from the New Roots African Methodist Episcopal Church in the Boston neighborhood of Dorchester, which I understand just celebrated 3 years. Is that right? Almost 3 years in existence. It was just recently founded, which is awesome. Congratulations. She's also the newly appointed Chief of Energy, Environment, and Open Spaces for the city of Boston, which sounds pretty rad. So those of you in Springfield, like, let's figure out how to, yeah, that's right, that's right. And she's an activist and advocate for ecological and social justice, youth engagement, and spirit-filled organizing. As a former director of Project Hip Hop, which stands for Highways into the Past, History, Organizing, and Power, she used the arts as a tool to raise awareness for social issues, from juvenile incarceration to funding for public transportation. She's received numerous awards, including the Barr Fellowship, the Celtics Heroes Among Us, I'm a Knicks fan, but that's cool, the Roxbury Founders Day Award, and the Boston NAACP Image Award. She's committed to engaging the faith community, and particularly the Black church, on climate change and ecological justice issues. Won't you please help me to welcome Reverend Mariama White-Hammond. And Reverend Sekou is an artist and theologian. Born in St. Louis, raised in the rural Arkansas Delta, Reverend Sekou's music is a unique combination of Arkansas Delta blues, Memphis soul, 1970s funk, and gospel. One part protest rally, one part Pentecostal tent revival, and one part late night juke joint. But Reverend Sekou's study of theology and religion and his fervor for social justice has led him to be actively involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as other actions related to social and climate justice. He's shown up at places in times of crisis, such as with Hurricane Katrina, the earthquake in Haiti, and protests in Ferguson, Missouri, and Charlottesville, Virginia, to lend his voice for justice, peace, and healing. He speaks to these issues through the written and spoken word, as well as through music. Won't you please join me in welcoming Reverend Sekou? So I'll just cede the floor to you if you have anything that you'd like to jump into right away. And I think these folks would love to hear a little bit more about you, about how you came to this work, and about what's going on right now.
So I think I'll start with the frame of when people ask me to define the work that I do, I say I do ecological justice work. And that's not always a phrase I think people have heard before, so I take a moment to explain why. For me, that is not a rejection of anybody else's frame. It's just what speaks most true to me in terms of what I feel called to. So eco means home, and ecology as a discipline looks at no organism by itself, but organisms in relationship. And when I look at the world, now intersectionality is like a word and everybody talks about it, but it's, I think because I'm a Black woman who grew up often between multiple communities, I think that just was how I see the world. And so in my environmental work, or however you frame it, I do not see a disconnect between that and the immigrant justice work I've done, the criminal justice work I've done, the work to support young people and intergenerational justice. For me, they are all connected because the ailments that lead to all these things are deeply connected. And I believe that we live in a world where we truly are interdependent, but we've created a society and an economy. Economy means management of home. We manage our home as if we are not connected. We are taught to step on one another to get where we need to go, and that just doesn't work. Because at the end of the day, I have no ability to create oxygen. I do not know how to produce water. And these are the things I fundamentally need to live. Now, I brought up my water bottle and I brought up my iPhone. And when I get out in the morning, it's true, if I leave my iPhone at home, I usually go back. If I leave my water bottle, I say, oh, I'll figure it out. But if the world falls apart, this will not work. The network it runs on is not real. This is what I need to live. And any society that would pollute the thing that is at the foundation of life is a sick society. So for me, climate change is just a deadline. Mama said, you're out of your mind, and if you don't get it together, you got to get up out of here. because the rest of the family is doing what they need to do. The plants are behaving like they should. The other animals are behaving like they should. The water is doing what it's supposed to. There's only one dysfunctional member up in this family, and it's us. So from my perspective, ecological justice is not about the parts per million in the atmosphere. We do have to pay attention to that. I have fought against fossil fuels. I can talk about a lot of the concrete things. But it is about a shifting of our mentality to understand that we are made to be interdependent with all the other beings on this planet. And if we can't get that through our thick skull, then maybe the most just thing is for us to go. And so when I look at the work we do in climate, it is not enough to pass policies that change our vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. We as human beings are fighting for the right to be worthy of remaining on this planet. Because we are the only ones. Giraffes don't say, I have 47 spots, you have 49, we can't do this. Or because, my neck is a little longer than yours, you need to go over there where there's no water. We're the only species that behaves the way we do and creates divisions and literally will starve people of what they need to live based on false constructs that we have created. So I can talk the science, I do the science, but I have had probably some of the best conversations with scientists who say, I've told people everything about what's happening, and I've come to the recognition this is actually a deeply moral and spiritual crisis where human beings have to decide, are we gonna get ourselves together? Because mama is not gonna let us live up in this house if we keep cutting up like this forever. And so I hope, and part of the reason I accepted this invitation was to be here with my good friend Sekou, who we see each other, we say we're gonna hang out together, but half the time we're like in different parts of the country and then we run into each other and so we get to connect. But I just wanna start from that frame that is all deeply connected. If we try to lower the parts per million, but do it on the backs of immigrants in our communities, then we don't deserve to live. If we try to change our policies so we can protect ourselves from sea level rise, but we don't do the same for our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa, we don't deserve to live. At the end of the day, it has got to be us radically transforming how we behave so we are worthy to remain in this house.
The doors of the church are open.
All right, thank you so much. Reverend Sekou, so this is an arts festival. You're a musician. Could you just say a few things about the power of arts to bring about social change? And in particular, if you want to talk about climate, that's fine. But as Reverend Mariama said, we need to change in a lot of ways. So how are you bringing about that consciousness in music, bringing people together and stuff like that?
But first, let me begin by just saying it's so good to see you. It's been too long. It's been way too long. So I just want to say thank you. And on a personal note, I want to thank you publicly. 16 years ago, you came to New Orleans and you said to me, I think you have a drinking problem. And you were the first of my friends who would say it to me. And I've been sober 15 years. So thank you. I started my music career at 45, so 5 years ago. And in part because after Ferguson, I had the blues and I needed to sing. And I mean, there's a way we can talk about art, right, in terms of the ways in which it inhabits certain reified spaces, such as art museums, concert venues, and that kind of thing. But I want to begin with the art of the people who raised me, right? That my first sonic memories are the moans of deacons, right? That there's a way in which everyday working class, poor black people articulate for us what it means to live as art is a part of the natural way in which we live, right? It's the way little black girls play slide and double dutch, right? That there's a certain rhythmic quality to what the theologian Nicole Flores at University of Virginia calls the quotidian, right? The way in which they move through time and space is an art form. And so there's that piece, right? The part of the world that I'm from, the Arkansas Delta, which is just the Arkansas side of the Mississippi Delta, right, produced the greatest musical tradition in the history of the Western world and produced the greatest institution in the history of the world, Western world, the Black Church. Now, I would argue that the greatest denomination in the history of the Western world is the Church of God in Christ. But I won't offend the AMEs and the Baptists in the room. Right?
You are a Methodist. I'm just saying.
I'm serving a Methodist church because they need sanctification.
You know, I couldn't serve in the Kojic church.
This is true.
Still.
Yeah, they don't let women be around there. And you can be gay on the organ, but you can't be out. But that's another conversation. But anyway, so that's why I ain't there. But I think, and so I want to, there's a way in which, and to answer your question more directly, we were playing a gig in Waverly, Alabama. So that's southern enough where they doing crawfish boils, right? So we near the bottom of Alabama. And it's about 4,000 drunk white folks. And so I told my band, I said, put on your Wakanda wear. And they was like, you sure? I was like, yeah, we're going to go out here. So we do our thing. They call us for 2 encores, which is never done in festivals. And as I'm walking across the field to go get something to eat, I see 4 good old boys staring at me. And I said, oh, this is going to be a problem. And one walked up to me. He says, God damn it, I just had a spiritual experience, you son of a bitch. You touched my soul. Now, that some bitch in the White House, I voted for him. We got some people not liking each other because some of them black and some of them white and some of them wear hijab. What kind of foolishness is that? Fuck him. You touched my soul, you some bitch. And his buddy was like, you goddamn right. Then I went and played a gig in the bottom of Arkansas. The bottom of Missouri, in the Boot Hill. And I walked into the gig, and the musicians in the room know this. I walked into the gig, and the money was in cash on the table. So I knew it was going to be a problem, because that's not how it happened. So he says, I saw you, I booked you, 3 seconds, he says, but my people like music, but most of them are Trump supporters. I was like, all right, I'm not going to change my set. Now, I wasn't worried, because, I had some St. Louis boys with me, so I knew I was safe. I'm nonviolent, they not. And we did our song, and we got this song, Goodbye, Baby. We'll probably do it tonight. And it goes, baby, I hope this letter finds you doing better than I am. I know it's been a while since you heard from me. I've been busy trying to get free. I'm writing you from a God-forsaken place where they'll soonest kill a man, woman, boy, or girl because of their race. And every other day, a mother has to say the words that no mother should have to say, goodbye, baby. And I just prefaced the song. I was like, I don't care what your politics are. No mother should have to bury their child. And we finished, right? And I'm standing outside. This is when I smoke cigarettes. I'm standing outside smoking a cigarette. And the good old boys would come out with tears rolling down their faces, and their wives would translate. You got a convert tonight. And now I pray to the Lord ain't call me the Trump's folks are my evangelism field. I pray to the Lord, because I may have to Jonah that one. I don't want to go there.
Don't ask for it.
Yeah, so I ain't asking for it. But there is a way I've seen through all the speeches that I've given, all the lectures that I've done, the way in which art breaks through. And I'll tell you one last story. We were in Berea, Kentucky, and we were on stage, and we do this song called "Bury Me," which was written by our pastor in Charlottesville, that we sang in the church, and we couldn't go outside because Nazis were outside. This is in 2017. So I'm telling the story, and a guy yells out in the audience, "That's a lie. That never happened. You race baiter." So security was about to go get him. And I said, "No, leave him alone." Because I know when that 6 over that 4 chord hit, he got 2 options. That demon gonna flee or submit. I know that. And when we hit that 6 over the 4 on the turnaround, he shot out of there. Right? And so I feel like there's a way in which music can break through, right? And art can break through in the ways of all the speeches that I've ever given in my life can ever do. And then lastly, I would say, particularly for those of folks who like to bring artists in, I'm not saying this will happen here. I'm talking about the other festivals. Pay artists. Don't make them parenthetic, right? Pay them what they're worth. They deserve it. Because part of it is that as artists, we will do it for free because we love it so much. And so I would just want that in terms of a justice issue, right? It's not only the ways in which we incorporate art making, cultural work, and all that kind of thing into what we're doing, but it is to say that we're going to honor and respect artists. And so that's about all I got to say about that.
Thank you. I'm going to come sit up here so I can see if anybody puts their hands up and wants to ask anything. I have one more question for the two of you, and then we'll bring some of our other panelists up, and then we can just keep going. Both of you, in your own way, talk about a quality of right relationship with humanity and the world. And I'm wondering if you could reflect on the idea, especially as people of faith, of a conversion experience to that right relationship. Like, how do we encounter that sense and know that's where we need to be? And if Reverend Sekou, I hope it's okay. I read a beautiful passage on your part where you talked about going to Paris and the words that you, and following the footsteps of James Baldwin and stuff, and the words that you had put in this particular piece, which was really beautiful, is that you said that you did as Baldwin did, which is that you faced something there that you had been running from. And I'm not asking you to plumb that depth right now, but I think we all have some aspect of that, and that conversion into who we are meant to be with one another, whether it's ecologically, whether it's as human beings, as artists. But I wonder if you could either of you could just reflect on that idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, word.
So I think there are really two experiences I think of. So one, I tell the story, I think, a little last night about, in high school, hearing about the ozone layer, getting involved. It was the 90s, so I remember giving up aerosol hairspray, which, if y'all remember the hairdos in the 90s, that was a big deal. Now, I have to say, I don't know why a half bang was ever attractive. Anyway, we don't need to go back there. But, and then promptly walking away because I went to the first meeting that I had ever been to of the environmental meeting group at my school, and I was the only woman of color. And just feeling this real disconnect. And so I walked away, and there were a number of experiences. I mean, I used to work with some young people who were fighting a cement plant in their community, and that was huge. But I think a couple of turning points, but I think one that I think about in particular was that in summer of 2008, I was running a program, Project Hip Hop, and we would train young people in hip hop arts and then using their art as a tool to talk about things that were going on in a community. And so it was everything from, our lived experience of one of our young people who was like the least, drama sort of young person in our group ending up getting arrested because somebody else assaulted her at the bus. I mean, just sort of all of those things. And we ended up having a summer, or over a 10-month period, in which 5 of the young people in my program were shot. 2 of them died. One of them went out to collect money for the funeral of a young person who had been killed in the early morning on Saturday. And then later on his way home, he was shot and ended up in the hospital. And so it was just like a really tough time. And I started getting, I think we went to IKEA because, you know, we had our house, we had the house, but we didn't have very much furniture. Y'all, I don't know if y'all know what it is you finally get something and then you're like, wait, that's all the money. I guess we're gonna have to put this furniture together piece by piece as we, each paycheck we'll be able to get something new. And so we were at IKEA and I bought this little orchid. And I was obsessed with that orchid. And from there I went to growing herbs on our deck. And you know, it took me a while to realize that after I got part of a community garden, which I now coordinate, there was just so much death around me. And so to wake up every morning to see the flowering of that plant, to cook with the herbs that grew on my deck, these were little ways to bring life back in. And I don't even think, I know at the time I wasn't aware. But I started to realize that getting my hands in the soil and leaning in to the natural cycle of life that had not been disrupted by human foolishness that leaves our young people in a position where they would shoot each other. Like, that is not okay and that is not normal. And the fact that we live in a country where we are not like, stop everything, something is wrong when our children are killing each other. And so I started growing. And when my young people would go through a rough time, I'd be like, oh, let's get together. Well, I have to go over to my garden, so you just have to come with me, right? And I would teach them what a strawberry leaf looks like. And this is how you see a tomato. And I would teach them about how tomatoes let up volunteers, right? That name for when, you know, a tomato, little cherry tomato falls, and then the next year, because that seed fell there, it shoots up a plant. I really started to heal in ways in the soil that I don't think I could have. And I'm not anti-therapy at all. There are lots of many ways to heal. But I needed to not talk. I needed to get my feet dirty. I needed to be in the soil. And so I've never stopped that relationship with the land. In fact, last year, my husband and 8 of our friends, together we launched a Black-owned cooperative farm in Loudoun, New Hampshire, which is where the NASCAR track is, and where a lot of bikers. So we don't have a Black Lives Matter sign on our front lawn because we'd like our house to still be there. But we've been bringing people up, and so I do move at the high policy level, and if it still happens, I'll be in Scotland as part of the COP26. But I truly believe, because I've seen it, that if we change our relationship with Mother Earth, it can heal us. It can bring us together. It can fill holes that we're filling with a lot of other substitute, half-ass things that cannot produce. They cannot produce what we're looking for. So I see the natural world as a gift that we are destroying. And that summer, it shifted, and I didn't even realize until maybe a couple years later when I looked up and I was like, oh, like the old folks said, I wouldn't trade nothing for my journey now. I had to look back and see where my journey had brought me. And so I do believe that shifting that relationship can also help us get right with each other. I think it can radically change who we are and allow us to see ourselves differently and each other differently.
Yeah, thank you so much. Reverend Sekou, do you want to add
Yeah,
anything?
I would to answer your question, I would begin with, the people who raised me, right? So the little old place I'm from, Zen, Arkansas, got about 11 houses and 35 people. And my grandmother, in terms of a conversion story, there was in our little town where we had a temperamental washing machine that had gone out, and so we went to the laundromat, which sat on the edge of a trailer park. And as we walked in, there was a little boy with his mama playing with a car. So I thought they would like me and my grandmother in terms of just playing. And a little boy says, "Mommy, mommy, look at the niggers, look at the niggers." And I had never heard the word before. I'm about 4, 5. But I knew it was bad based on my look on my grandmother's face. So I started crying. And she kind of snatched my arm and she said, "Hush up, boy. I didn't let them run over us when they was lynching us, and I'm not going to start now." And so the woman was like, you know how children are, And she says, "No, you taught him that. Children do what they're taught." So me and the boy, we didn't play around. We played around each other, rather. We didn't play together. He had his Hot Wheels, I had mine. We kind of rolled around each other, but we didn't play together. And then as we were preparing to leave, this 20-something white woman was sweeping, and she had these big bags of clothes next to her. And it was obvious that she had run out of washing powders and money. So my grandmother walks over to her, gives us a new box of washing powders and a $10 roll of quarters. And we walk out, and she says, "Boy, you speak truth with grace." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." So for me, that was a conversion experience. I was like, oh, because they had raised me. They says, white folks are dangerous, but you got to love them. Right? And so that's one conversion story for me. The other is the ways, right, in terms of as a person of faith, the way I orient myself, right? For me as a Christian, right, it doesn't have a monopoly on truth. But in terms of, for me, the way, it's also the way I orientate, right? So I believe I believe in orthodoxy. Jesus was born, God chose to be born in the body of an unwed teenage mother among an unimportant people in an unimportant part of the world. Lived under occupation, crucified by the state, and rose again. A peasant. Oh, that's good to me. Right, so that's how I orientate, so that I'm oriented to that. And so in terms of, for me, my ethical ground of being begins with where are the most vulnerable, if God chooses to be among the most vulnerable, where are the most vulnerable in your project? Which is a critique to most Christians, right? They're reproducing market-driven theology. They're reproducing the market in the way in which they relate to everyday people. And so for me, I'm often right. So Albert Camus is my soulmate. He's wrong on Algeria. But when he says that the artist must never side with the makers of history, rather those who are the victims of it, that sounds like Matthew 25:35 to me. Such what you've done unto the least of these, so you've done it unto me. So what are the ways in which our ethical ground of being, who is catching hell, and how do we show up, right, together, right? This was my conversion on queer stuff. I grew up in a homophobic denomination. But what, Mother, you said when folks was catching hell, I had to show up. And so these babies, I don't understand everything. I don't understand most of the stuff I don't understand, right? But I do know that comprehension is not the prerequisite for compassion. So I ain't got to understand it. Leave them alone. And so I think that ethical ground of being, emerging out of my own theological orientation, is the way in which I approach it, right? And then lastly, in terms of my relationship, I'm a country boy, right? So, I got farm in Arkansas. We got cows and horses and pigs and squirrels, you know what I'm saying? I can catch one about 20 yards off with a pellet gun. So there's a way in which my relationship with the land, it changed as I became more of an urbanite. And it also is not just simply because it's an urbanite, it's the way in which there's a cultural disdain for poor working class people's culture. So that's country to be having a farm, right? I lived in Paris, right? And so for me, what happened was, because I'm quoting Baldwin. Baldwin says in an interview with Studs Terkel in 1987 that I couldn't write my first novel until I embraced the thing I was running from, watermelon and the blues. Right? So there's a way in which Black cultural practices have been so demonized, and farming is one of them, in popular culture. We wind up reproducing it, right, in the way in which we engage the culture and the way in which we engage working class people. Right, because the smartest woman I knew was a woman named Miss Roberta, and she couldn't write her name, and she couldn't read. And she was the smartest woman I knew. Boy, go on over there and get some of that mint and crush it up. There's some oregano growing right there. Go get that, and I want you to rub it on your grandmama's knees. Smartest woman I knew. Right? And so what are the ways in which, in our discussion about the climate, do we pay attention to the indigenous habits and practices of people of color, right? And particularly in the context of the United States, where white supremacy is such a defining factor. It's not the only one, but it's such a defining factor. And so part of it is, how do we go spend time with people who this is their cultural habits and their cultural practices, because they may have something. I believe they got something to teach us. So that's that.
Wow. And thank you so much. That was a deep question. Thank you so much for your answers. Truly appreciated. So I want to, if it's all right, I want to invite a couple of our local leaders to come up too. This is Liz Ogilvie, who's a racial justice warrior and food systems activist, seeding justice in her hometown, Springfield, Mass., where she serves as the director of the Springfield Food Policy Council. Liz is also the board chair of the youth-driven urban agriculture organization Gardening the Community. She also serves the steering committee and advisory boards of the statewide Massachusetts Food System Collaborative and Massachusetts Farm to School. Welcome, Liz. And we're going to invite Sarita Hudson to come up. Sarita brings over 25 years of experience managing programs, developing coalitions, and building community capacity on issues including environmental health, climate action, and resilience, sexual violence prevention, women's rights, and social justice. As Director of Programs and Development at the Public Health Institute of Western Mass, she leads the coalition building team and directs the Health Policy Commission-funded Shift Healthy Homes Asthma Program, the Pioneer Valley Asthma Coalition, and the Springfield Healthy Homes Collaborative, and the 413 Cares online community resource database. So awesome, thank you, welcome, Sarita.
Ernesto is here.
And
Ernesto?
Ernesto, yeah, good, excellent. And Ernesto Cruz is Western Massachusetts Regional Coordinator for Neighbor to Neighbor. Neighbor to Neighbor states, in an era of income inequality, environmental degradation, and racism, we are building the power to confront this triple crisis in Massachusetts. We fill the ballot box with our votes. We fill the streets with our voices. We seed the new alternatives that put power and decision-making in the hands of those directly affected. We are certain that a better world is possible and that we are the ones to build it. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. All right, so welcome to you all. I've just opened the floor to you all and say, I mean, any interaction, any with what's been shared, anything just come to mind that you want to jump in on? I mean, you probably came here with a few things in mind that you wanted to share too, so please, I'll let y'all figure that out. Or do you want me to call on you?
I'll go. I'll lead us off.
All right, word, please do.
I'm going to warn you that when members of the clergy use words that are colorful, it gives the rest of us permission. So I'll do my best, but I already heard half-ass and too many other words I'm not going to repeat that Reverend Sekou spoke. I don't know where that bio came from, but I like the idea of... Came from where?
Your website.
I have these interns.
Okay.
What can I say? I like thinking of myself as a warrior and a revolutionary, and not in this violent way that we are, it often comes to mind when we think about that, but in a way that calls us in to say that we can each be warriors in our lane. We can each be revolutionary in our thinking and our relationship to land. Sometimes I prepare things to say. I didn't today, so I don't know what's going to come out. I am a person of faith, and while not clergy like Sarita, spent some time studying theology at Div School. And it is only, that was many, many years ago, but it has only been in the last 10 years when I have been putting my hands in the soil that my spirit has filled in ways that I don't have the words, and I am a woman of words, to articulate my relationship to myself, to my family, to my community, and to my ancestral history, which is our ancestral history because we live in the United States, and Black history is our history because we were here in a forced and kidnapped and enslaved way. But several things that Reverend Sekou and Reverend Mariama said that jumped out at me have made me begun to think about, are we honoring the history of our country, this land we call our country? Are we honoring the history of Mother Earth in our day-to-day lives, in the way that we relate to things? How many people bought food out here today, or thinking about buying food out here today? So I want you to think about how that food came to be on these trucks. I spent a number of years in my pathway to this work as a school garden teacher. And we teach kids this cute little song that dirt made my lunch. But think about that. Everything we eat comes from the sea or the land. And now for the majority of us, everything we eat is grown by people who do not look like us. White, mostly straight men control the farmland in this country, and non-white, mostly brown people farm that land. And I have to believe that in order to survive the conditions of agriculture, that they had to do what my great-great-grandmother, who lived her life as a slave, and my grandmother, who lived her life as a sharecropper for the majority of it, had to do. My grandmother used to tell me she only died in 2015, so I had her for a very long time. I would say, Nana, when you were picking, knowing you were going to make $15 at the end of the season, how did you do it? And she would say, love, baby. Love for your daddy and your aunties and your uncles, but also love for the children who were going to eat that food because I knew they were going to do better than the generation before. I have come to think of myself as an ancestor in training, and I want to call you in to do that as well. Because I work in these big policy ways. We have 3 equity bills before the legislature now. But in the summer, I spend the majority of my time with my hands in the soil, working either with young children in the school garden, still socially distanced, teenagers at Gardening the Community, and this is a shameless plug, 200 Walnut Street, beautiful farm store. Black people built that. We didn't build it just for Black people, but where it is built, we built it for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Southeast Asian, and poor white people who live in that neighborhood. because I had the great pleasure to spend some time working at the Public Health Institute with Sarita, where I understood that social determinants of health, the conditions of our lives, the places where we eat, live, work, and play, have so much more to do with the fact that I may develop diabetes or hypertension or heart disease than with my being Black in the way that I had been socialized to believe. And recently I realized that the work of growing food in the hood, and I say that descriptively, not pejoratively, is my art. It is where I sing the songs of my ancestors that I don't even know the words to, but I hear their voices whispering to me every time I put my feet in the soil. And every time I plant something, I know that I am sequestering carbon and helping to save all of you and to save me. And the Spirit moves through me. So I call on you in the same way that they did to hear the songs, because they're in our DNA. And it is not just Black people who have ancestors. White people come from people too. And maybe more recently in the last 300, 400, 500 years, it's not an ancestral history you want to explore, but just as I get to live the dreams of my ancestors, I deeply believe in my heart that when we transcend to whatever is next, it's late, but that's when we have the aha moment. So you also have ancestors who are looking at you to right the wrongs that we have committed against Mother Earth. Some of us just as participants who don't have power to change it, but some people descend from those who made it. So call up your ancestral spirits, call up your own spirits and say, what can I do tomorrow? Can I teach someone something? Can I help support one of the many things that you're going to hear folks talk about? Or can I just live my life in a little bit of a different way, less as a consumer? We are the young siblings here. Honor your elder siblings, the trees and the sea and the soil when you go outside, and I guarantee you, you will hear them whisper back to you.
So I'm here standing in for Samantha Hamilton. You heard from the powerful voices of our resident advisors on our Climate Change, Health, and Equity Committee. And Sam is the leader. She has a family emergency. Please send prayers to her and her family. But I'm here today to talk about the work that we are doing in Springfield, led by Sam, led by collaborating organizations, by Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, by Wayfinders, by Neighbor to Neighbor, as well as this amazing group of resident leaders who are out there and changing the world and changing the conversation, bringing in, it's not just the climate impacts. We had the conversion moment in 2011 when there was a tornado that came through Springfield. We had the October snowstorm, and for those of you who aren't from around here, when there's a snowstorm in October with the leaves fully on the trees come down, power goes out, people are struggling, and that lasted for a week for many people before they got power. And with the tornado, it was the people who had money, who had insurance, they got their homes rebuilt very fast. It was the people who were renters or didn't have money for insurance, they struggled to get housing, to get somebody to come and fix up their place, or to find another place to live. So we see the inequitable impacts of climate change. It was very clear. The city, then the movement started here for a climate action and resilience plan, led by Rise for Social Justice. You heard from one of their organizers on the video. And then bringing in the Public Health Institute and the Asthma Coalition. And so I was there speaking from the Public Health Institute, talking about the health inequities that were going on around climate. We have been the #1 asthma capital for the last few years. Wow. This year we dropped to 12. So that's a really good thing. We're making progress. Really happy to say that. But it's only the beginning of our work, because we have to weave together understanding the climate impacts, understanding the health impacts, because we have too many health disparities here in this community. Asthma, 4 times as many Latinx people in the emergency room as whites. African American, twice as many as whites. That's terrible. Those kinds of inequities, we've got to address that. And then the whole structural racism, the systemic racism that underlies this whole system. And it's not going to be me, the white woman from the Public Health Institute, who's leading that work to make the change. It's going to be our resident advisors. It's going to be our community folks who are really going to lead the way. So I'm so excited that you got to hear their voices today. And we are now working on 2 policies, and this has come from starting from all the policies that were in the city's plan, down, looking at housing and transportation, going through a process to see what would reduce greenhouse gas emissions, what would improve health, and what would address these really difficult issues of structural racism. So we ranked each of these, or the group, the resident advisors, ranked each of these issues based on those 3 measures and came up with their priorities. Then, with those priorities, they took it out to the community, and this was during the pandemic. So it was through Zoom and workshops on Zoom and surveys, and went out to the community and said, what's most important to you? And came up with 2 policies that are now the focus of the Live Well Springfield climate justice work. One is a race and health equity impact assessment requirement. So that would mean for development, such as a biomass plant, the city would first have to look at how that will impact people of color and their health before making approval of any kind of development. So that's a huge change. Now we have some progress. The mayor has said that racism is a public health crisis, and we have a new Office of Racial Equity. So we are going to build on that to get this policy in place. The other policy that we're working on is community choice energy. So clearly we cannot continue with greenhouse gas emissions as it is now. So we have to look at how does the city of Springfield take control of its own electricity and create and require it to be renewable. So that is called Community Springfield taking on its own electricity and requiring it to be renewable, and as well as taking control of the energy efficiency funding that's required for all of us in the state of Massachusetts to pay into. This funding is not equitably distributed. So if the city of Springfield can get control of that funding, then we can see some more addressing that structural racism. So those are the 2 policies. You'll learn more in the next 3 years as we keep working on the project.
All right, thank you. I think I could do it in 10 minutes or less.
No, you don't have 10 minutes. You got half of that.
All right, we'll take half of that.
Cool.
So first of all, grateful to be here. Thank you all. This is really important. I'm Ernesto Cruz. I'm the Western Mass Regional Field Coordinator for Neighbor to Neighbor. We have chapters in different cities across the state, and what we do is we activate people to get engaged in their community, learn how it works, and then actually change policy to make their lives better. So it's practical, it's on the ground, it's something where we're not pie in the sky. We're looking to actually make changes today that impact people and build from there. Also, I'm on the board of Co-op Power that develops community solar projects in the Northeast region. So we've got a couple of big solar projects that are on their way, and it's a model that helps people have solar for less, and it's community owned, which really is a big part of what I'm going to talk about. I also work with the Energy Democracy Project on a thing called the Resource Hub. So it's a national project. The group that I'm a part of within it works on getting projects across the finish line. All across the United States, we see the same things happen over and over again with the balance between utilities and community and how we actually get ownership of energy assets into people's hands, that's a challenge. And so we work on connecting different states and practitioners of energy democracy to be working with each other, and I'll get into what energy democracy is in a little bit. I also work with the Red, Black, and Green New Deal on data and research, also with Puerto Rico Grid. I've been doing some consulting on that as well. And I also work with Western Mass Medicare for All, which connects everything in terms of the just transition. So I'll go with that. So energy democracy uses a just transition framework to get away from an extractive economy that takes from people and goes towards an economy that works for absolutely everyone. And so what that means is we want to have frontline people working on owning energy assets as well as changing energy assets, governing energy assets, so really creating community so that people have skin in the game, so that they have a part of administration of what they're doing. So it's not someone coming to save us, but rather we learn about things ourselves and we get active in doing what is difficult and really growing up as a community and saying, like, let's really take the power into our own hands. You know, with the science and the IPCC reports, what's been going on lately, we know that within our lifetime, Worcester could be beachfront property, right? Like, and what does that really mean? That's like when someone has a health issue and they don't want to face it and it's in the back of their subconscious, that's what we're doing. And sometimes it's that intervention we have to have because people who have this profit motive are really more interested in the profit than they are in everyone's well-being, right? And so that comes from a place of, there's the particular cognitive bias that I'll call it is confirmation bias, which means because I'm rich and because I have assets, that means that I'm always right. And we know that that's not the case. We know that confirmation bias can get anyone regardless if you're rich or poor, right? But what we have is confirmation bias that we're all subject to. We all have to deal with the outcome of what the confirmation bias of the fossil fuel industry is doing to us. We need to have an intervention, right? We can't let a family member of our human family determine the future for the rest of us. That's just unacceptable. So there's a psychological component to that. That profit motive is not good for energy democracy. Energy is a human right. We know that people have health issues. We know that there's a tech divide. There's the fact that you need technology, you need internet to actually do anything in this world at this point. And so we know that energy is a human right at this point. We cannot talk about equality if people don't have energy as a part of their lives where it's there for them, where it's not a service or a resource, but it's something that is there equally for everyone. Also, just quickly, the Pareto distribution, we're well off of that 80-20 Pareto distribution where society is okay. Normally when we get to this point, things get really dicey. There's revolutions, all sorts of things. I'm hoping that this time we could do things a little bit differently. I think that with technology and our interconnectedness, I would hope that we don't have to repeat history, but I'm not holding my breath. And what we need is some systems thinking. So we can depersonalize this and get away from the right versus left conversation if we think about things in terms of systems thinking, right? Systems thinking says that the world is too complex for any one of us to understand. There will always be things outside of our understanding, but if we pay attention and we see how things work in an interrelated fashion, we can start making small adjustments to different things and work on making things better. If that sort of education was in schools, we would be doing much, much better. So education, getting past the complexity, right? So what ends up happening is because of this whole profit competition model, we end up having psychological warfare. We're always like having this sport relative to, oh, who could do the better business deal? Who could keep the cards closest to the vest? Who could? And it's just like, it's a ridiculous competition that we have when it comes to business. This is much different. Energy is a human right. Planet is in crisis. We need to move away from thinking that everything is a game. That's a big problem. So we also need to be having community-owned projects, solar, wind, battery storage especially, and then changing the grid. So policy that changes the grid from a big grid to a microgrid. And what I like in a microgrid too is like your fuse box in your basement. The microgrid separates different cities so that they're not all tied in together, different communities so that they're not all tied in together. So when we have these big weather anomalies, the whole community is not out. People are able to move from one place to the other while still having electricity. We're not stuck in this one big nationalized grid. which is what this administration is going towards. So we really have to watch out for that. Pay attention to the fact that we should have fuses in between our communities. We should really have that. And then community choice relative to the project we're working on here. Community choice aggregation is just one step towards a much bigger concept, and it really has to do with us being able to determine or to have a buying group that gets energy at a lower rate if we do our job. But we get to decide where we source our energy and what we do with our energy. If that energy is actually cheaper than the market value, there's profit there which can be then put into programs for energy efficiency, put into programs for behavioral change, put into other programs to maybe municipally owned solar. Maybe now Springfield can own more panels on top of all these buildings or whatever it might be. And so we really need to put power back into communities' hands, because we are the only answer, because it's us who aren't really paying attention because we've got too much, life is too complicated, versus people making life complicated because they keep on winning. And that's sort of, once you're already winning, you don't ever want to stop winning. And so just thinking about game theory, there's a need to change the rules of the game. And in systems thinking, the first rule, if you want to make a big change, is you change the rules. We need to look at policy, need to change these rules so that we can work together, reset the game, and play it again with everyone at the table, because we're all on this planet together. We're stuck here with each other, so we can make it a good thing instead of a bad one. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Thank you to all of you. We're coming in under the wire here. This is a larger conversation, obviously, so let's keep having it here locally. Please, I know you all have some information out at a booth, is that right?
Right, we have a booth that's right over here it says Live Off Springfield.
Awesome. Do you have do you want to give a shout out to anything that, like, where people could go for more information? Should they go to Neighbor or get in touch with?
Yeah, n2nma.org.
All right, cool.
And look at the Springfield Food Policy Council website. Everybody knows me. And my email is liz@springfieldfoodpolicycouncil.org. We can be really wonky on this side, and they were all about spirit, and I'm somewhere in the middle. Join us wherever you are. Here's some homework. Go outside. When you get home, take off your shoes. Put your feet on the ground right now, everybody in the room. Put your feet on the ground, both feet on the ground. Plant them firmly. This is from whence we come. Be wonky with us on policy and practical issues, and then feel it in your body. You'll know what to do, and if you don't, the three of us will tell you.
Yes. Well, with thanks to the wonky and to the ancestors, please join me in thanking these folks.